So, what do you do when being powerful doesn't feel safe? That's what I want to talk about today. I spent the weekend just gathering my thoughts and getting myself together, retreating somewhat to consider all the stuff going on around Professor Jason Arday's death and just recuperating from just watching it all unfold. And I'm thinking about what happens inside of us when we witness something like this, when we see a public punishment taking place before our very eyes. And that's the way that I have internalized what I see with happening with Professor Jason and other cases that have gone on beforehand. And I'm asking myself the question of what happens to us when we watch people that look like us, people that are prominent, people that are powerful, controversial, or imperfect, people who are outspoken, or just plain visible in their space. What happens when we witness them go through something like this? And I'm convinced that we're not just witnessing it, we're learning from it. We learn lessons. There's part of us that's taking notes as we watch this thing play out. There's part of us that says to ourselves, that's what happens when you get too visible. That's what happens when you become too powerful or make a mistake in senior leadership. Like you can be challenging in senior spaces. You can't get too big for your boots. You can't rock boats. You can't forget your place. You can't step out of your station. Like these are some of the lessons that we're privy to when we begin to watch things like this take place before our very eyes. And no different me. Like this weekend, honestly, one of the old familiar questions, but painful questions nonetheless, just surfaced and I had to deal with it. The question is, how can you issue the call to women, especially global majority women, especially black and brown women? How can you issue the call for us to rise up and to be more powerful and to be fully expressed as sovereign leaders in the face of all this risk, in the face of all this danger? And let's face it, that's not a silly question, is it? It didn't feel silly. It felt very real to me. The danger feels very real. And I realized that all forms of prejudice are affecting how powerful people in public, people in invisible and in the public eye that are in black and brown bodies, particularly, are judged so differently, are interpreted so differently, are treated so differently often. And so I've had to be making sense of all of this. And here's where I've come to. Here's what I want to leave with you today is that we just can't allow the reality of the risk to become internalized so that it begins to be a command inside of us about to lead small, about how we show up, about playing small, about minimizing ourselves. We cannot internalize what we're seeing so that it begins to guide the way that we show up in leadership. And so, what I want to do today is share with you the kind of five ideas, the insights that I've been journaling around this weekend, the kind of tips, if you will, around how to manage when powerful expression doesn't feel safe. So, the first thing that I want to leave with you is that we must know who sent us. We must understand that we are divinely appointed leaders. As global majority women of faith, it's incumbent upon us at times like this to decide with the full weight of what it means to decide where our authority comes from, where our permission to lead at this level comes from, where our calling to be at this level of leadership comes from. If the answer to that inquiry is that it's your boss or it's the organization or it's the industry that allows you, that gives you license to lead at this level, then guess what? That means that they have the license to take it away, that they have the license to decide that no, you're not worthy of the authority. This weekend, as I wrestled with this, I had to come to the conclusion afresh that my authority and your authority doesn't originate in the rooms that we lead in, doesn't originate from the people that we lead with, doesn't originate in our industry. That there is a calling that's higher than that. And of course, I understand that it's natural to be thinking about safety. We talk a lot about psychological safety right now. And of course, this is important. Of course, it is important to be asking ourselves, is it safe to say this or to show up here or to go for that? Of course, it's normal to be considering this. But in the same breath that we're asking the questions about our safety, I realize that we need to be affirming too, who we are, whose we are, how we got here, what's been entrusted to us, what's ours to do, who called us, who's authorizing us. Like these need to be our consideration too. And it doesn't mean that we become immune once we start to have this contemplation. It doesn't mean that we become immune to the consequences. We can see that plainly in the case of Professor Jason, playing out right before our very eyes. But what it does for me, and I'm hoping it does for you, is remind us that we're part of something bigger than us. That by faith, that this our leadership is not random. It's a part of a plan. It's part of a bigger thing that's unfolding. That for me is somehow steadying. That for me is somehow affirming. And I think it's critical that we remember who sent us, who authorizes us, that you're going to have to decide that for yourself. So the second thing is that I think that in line with that, we need to know what we're willing to pay for. In the Bible, there's a story of a queen called Esther. And Esther was this Jewish girl who became queen to the most powerful king in the lands, right? Like it was a massive region, very powerful, and she became queen. And when a scheme to annihilate the Jewish people, Esther was a Jew. So when the scheme came up to annihilate these people, Esther's uncle, who was a kind of mentor to her, sent her a message to tell her what was happening and reminded her that her positioning as queen, her positioning in that level of leadership was for such a time as this. That level of leadership wasn't random, it wasn't for with no consequence, that level of leadership was for the hard things, for the times of challenge, for the difficult problems, right? And so Esther went into prayer and she searched the matter out for herself, and she decided that yes, that this was a worthy cause, that this was an important thing, that actually yes, her positioning was for such a time as this. And she came to the conclusion, if I perish, I perish, but I'm going to do something about this. Now, I don't believe that Esther said, if I perish, I perish, flippantly. I don't believe that she took those words lightly. I believe that what happened was Esther found the reason for her leadership. She found and believed that something mattered more than her self-preservation, more than managing what would happen to herself. She was thinking about the outcome, the bigger cause, the joy that was set before her, the mission that she was called to handle, right? And that is conviction. And as global majority women leading at such a time as this, we need to find that level of conviction for ourselves. We need to ask ourselves, what matters enough that fear cannot be allowed to dictate the way that I go or what I decide to do or how the decision that I make? That fear cannot guide things, cannot make my mind up for me. We have to ask, what am I willing to pay for, the real price for? What am I willing to invest in or sacrifice for real? This is powerful. I found it powerful as I thought this through this weekend, that we must know what we're willing to pay for. The third thing is that we must build capacity to lead and carry the weight of this level of leadership in the first place. You know, in my world, this is about preparation. This is about preparing to lead in this space, preparing to lead in the space that you're in. When I think about this, I think about a story that happened, something that happened to me years and years ago. I was walking along the street with my friend. We were chatting away, minding our own business, enjoying each other's company. And then before I knew it, I felt this big thud in the middle of my back, and I found myself falling spectacularly towards the pavement. I mean, I splat bang smack on my face. And it was such a strange experience because when it was happening, it was almost like it was happening in slow motion. So I could feel myself falling to the ground, and I could feel that sort of powerlessness. I mean, it was happening in a split second, but it felt like it was happening over time, and I could feel the powerlessness to do anything about it. Because you see, I didn't see her coming. It was so completely unexpected that her thump propelled me to the ground with velocity, with power, with speed, and I could feel that I didn't have time to respond. I could feel it happening and couldn't do anything about it, right? And I think about that all the time. I think about how I rehearse in my mind that slow feeling of falling and not being able to do anything about it because it just winded me, it blindsided me. And that's what I mean about preparing. I mean, I often ask myself, what would have happened if I'd seen her coming? Maybe I would have stood differently. Maybe I would have been able to defend myself somehow. Maybe I would have been able to, like block the hit. Something, do something to stop the fall, to break the fall, to prevent the fall, right? And that's what I think that we're being asked to do. I think that we're being asked to prepare. You see, preparation isn't just about preparing for the opportunities. Preparation is also about preparing for the opposition that could come, preparing for the resistance that might rise up, preparing for the abuse or the challenge or the fight that we might be involved in. There's no question that these things are more than a potential. They're likely when we're leading at this kind of level. When we're global majority people leading at this kind of level, we can almost expect it, right? But here's the thing that when we're prepared for it, when we when we get ready for it, that it doesn't have to displace us. It doesn't have to knock us off our feet. It doesn't have to we don't have to fall spectacularly because of it. So we really must be getting ready. We must prepare for leadership at this level. All right, number four is that we must not climb to this level of leadership alone. And this is really about community. This is about support. This is about a supportive network, building a supportive network deliberately for leadership at this type of level. And honestly, I feel, I suspect that we don't pay enough attention to this. Oftentimes, I see us soldiering things out alone, that we don't pay enough attention to curating the kind of support that we really need, that is essential for this kind of level. I remember years ago watching the documentary about Usain Bolt. The Jamaican athlete, the sprinter, the very fastest man. I don't know if he's still the fastest man in the world, but he was then the fastest man on the planet. And I remember it struck me as I watched the documentary just how much this man, he really reverenced his coach. He really understood the value. Now, this coach was this short, stocky man with a big belly, and honestly, to me, he looked like he couldn't run for a bus. But here he was coaching Usain Bolt, the fastest man in the world. Now, Hussein, it was his body, his power, his legs, his speed, but he somehow understood the power of having someone in your corner that could help you to maximize what you're capable of, that could pull your potential out of you. And it was the same when I was a midwife, that all the time it was the woman's body, all the time it was her baby, all the time it was her pain, but somehow the partnering with me as her midwife and the partnering with the team, somehow it was powerful to create the kind of outcome that we wanted to see. It was powerful to bring the potential for safe delivery, for coping and enduring the process to the fore, right? It was powerful. The partnership was powerful. And so I believe that it's time for us to take support seriously. We need the right people around us. We need the people who can tell us the truth, that call us out on our bullshit. The people that can point us back to God. Pray for us, pray for real, not be frightened of our power, not be intimidated by our status. We need the people that can stand with us through thick and thin, don't we? What I've learned on my own journey is that sovereignty doesn't do well. It can't be optimized in isolation or certainly prolonged isolation. Sovereignty, queens conference with other queens for this very reason, that we need people like-leveled, that like-minded, people who can see things from different perspectives to be in our corner to help us to cope with the reality of leading at this level. So don't go up there alone, right? That's number four. And number five is about refusing to let fear write the prophecy. And this really is about discerning. This is really about deciding what to do with the messages that are coming forth. Because you see, we can look and see what's happening with people. We can say, look what's happening to him. Look what's happening to her. Like, it can give us messages. We've spoken about that earlier on in this message, how it gives us messages. And if we're not careful, witnessing something like this can become a kind of prediction. It can become a kind of message that tells us this is going to happen to me, that I better not stay, I better not do this, or I better not go there, or I better not try this. Prediction becomes instruction, and then instruction becomes identity, the way that we be in our place. We've really got to watch out for this. What I say is, what I came to the conclusion of this weekend is that I can look and see what's happening with Professor Jason and the likes. I can see the risk. I can witness it. I can study it. I can name it. I can talk about it. But under no circumstances must we allow the experience of watching this and seeing this to become boundary for what's possible in our leadership. Under no circumstances must we allow what we're seeing, what's the messages that are coming up from what we're witnessing, to become prophetic declarations about what we're capable of, ceilings on our leadership, limits on our sovereign expression. We must make sure that this that we're seeing, that this that we're witnessing, doesn't become barriers and boundaries that we don't feel we're able to cross, that we predict and prophesy that we're not going to be able to cross because of what we're seeing and the patterns that we're noticing. Now, saying that, I'm not asking us to be naive, but what I am saying is that we can see clearly, prepare seriously, we can discern carefully, and we can build capacity and community, and we can count the cost. But then we must refuse to allow any fear or any doubt to decide what's possible through us. We must resist the temptation to allow what we see happening to be a prophetic declaration about where we're going to get to in our mission, our vision, our work, our assignment. This weekend, as I asked myself, how can I keep inviting women to show up powerfully in senior leadership in the face of all of this, I realized that my safety can't be the highest organizing principle. My certainty can't be the highest organizing principle, around my sovereign expression. And I'm not talking about us being reckless or seeking out to be provocative unnecessarily, or to unnecessarily expose ourselves to the risks or to be a martyr. I'm not suggesting that we're foolish, but I know that we can't allow fear to be the decision maker in our leadership. We cannot allow discomfort or the messages that are coming up out of what we're seeing to be declarations about our own personal path to fulfilling the call on our life, to fulfilling our leadership destiny. Let's not hand fear the authority to determine the size of what's possible through us. Let's not allow fear to determine how high we can climb and what we can accomplish when we're there. Now, if what I'm saying touches you, if you've got questions about it, if um, it's resonating, then I want you to reach out. Let's talk about it. Use the link that accompanies this video and let's talk. And in the meantime, I really want you to remember that you were born to change our world. You were born to lead at such a time as this, and I was born to support you. Sovereignty is your identity. Is your identity. You were born to change our world, and I was born to support you. And I can't wait to talk to you more about this. I'm Dion, and I look forward to hearing from you.